in the popular holiday song Frosty the Snowman. It's unclear how Frosty dies at the end of the song. He either seems to melt away or get hit by a car. But one thing that's clear is he obviously was an enemy of the state because he was promoting hurtful gender stereotypes by projecting his identity as a man onto snow. Also, he wasn't sensitive to being carbon neutral. He was promoting fossil fuels by having two eyes made out of coal. And if that was not bad enough, he also was promoting smoking in front of children by having a pipe. All Frosty wanted to do was have fun and have a good time with others. And increasingly, we can see that it always seems to be the good people that seem to get tamped down or meet a bad ending. And why is that? Why do we feel tamped down increasingly more and more? I mean, logic would tell us that politically they should be going after the big fish. So why would they want to bother with us, the little people? But even though it might seem counterintuitive, I think if we look at it, we can see it's a winning strategy. Because if we keep going after little guys, temp, 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 then none of us can actually ever rise to become an actual challenge to the state. Welcome to Conservative Coffee Hour. I'm Stanley Smith. At Conservative Coffee Hour, we're trying to navigate our way in this weird time and this weird narrative of, really where we are. I think half the country seems to see ourselves as being in some kind of war, and the other half of the country doesn't even know there's a war going on. We, sometimes fall in the trap, even though we're called conservative, we sometimes fall in the trap of falling into party line Republican and believing that the Republicans are on the right side and those Democrats are on the wrong side. We assume that because we're on the right side, those Democrats are lying and fabricating things. But the false assumption of that is that we believe our party is being truthful and straightforward with us. And I think increasingly we can see that that's not true. These identities as Republican and Democrats are both ill-suited and not suiting us very well. Recently, we had the example of Kristen Sinema from Arizona having this very realization, and she dropped the Democrat designation and now identifies herself as independent. I think in the last few decades, we've seen the word independent become something of a dirty word, and even less popular is the word moderate, which sounds like a complete cop out. But those words are helpful, and we need to pursue them and identify the fact that probably we all need to step aside and shift somewhat out of the identity of party and into the realization and empowerment of being independent, moderate, right-minded people. On the call, we were talking about oversight, and that government obviously has lots of oversight and increasingly impinges on our daily living. They oversee regulations and business, schools and funding, any number of things. And the idea of the topic came up, well, who oversees them? Who oversees the government? And we looked, of course, to the judicial system, but someone on the call pointed out that, of course, the state also controls the judicial system. So it's kind of a quandary, a round robin of who really is minding the shop. And in the topic of who's overseeing the state and state overreach, we can look at the long narrative and the unfolding series of events, not the least of which might be the weapons of mass destruction narrative as propagated by the Bush administration that I think even us on the Republican side had a hard time swallowing, but we did try to go along with that narrative, and it did accomplish what it intended to accomplish. It got us into a war in the Middle East, which the majority of American people certainly did not want, and it was a complete fabrication. It was a story. The Democrats can certainly look to that as the perfect example of why we should not trust the Republicans, because they're simply running a scam to accomplish their goals, and they're in the process doing whatever they can to take away our liberties and freedoms. Um, round the clock telephone surveillance and surveillance of records and restriction of rights seems to be, from the Democratic perspective, wholly and solely centered in the Republican camp. We also had the story of Waco and Janet Reno's intervention into this religious community. And she literally poked and prodded them into extinction as a way to help save them. It was a tragic and startling event. That was followed, of course, by the Oklahoma City bombing, which, as soon as it happened, President Clinton was on TV telling us that we should not assume it was Islamic terrorists, because in fact it was most likely domestic terrorists. They were already on to the idea that there was a fermenting discontent in this country, and the genre and topic of domestic terrorists was a real phenomenon. And it was a phenomenon based on the idea of a view of the government as increasingly a rogue operation, increasingly impinging on our freedoms and liberties. Do any of us condone the idea of blowing up buildings? I mean, certainly not. But the narrative of the underlying premise probably should have been explored and embraced and discussed. It probably would have been helpful and kept us from this trajectory, which has led us to where we are today. In church on Sunday, the story of Martin Luther King and his kitchen table experience was shared. The story was that Martin Luther King returned home one evening in Alabama after being on the trail, the campaign trail for civil rights. The phone rang at midnight. Everyone else was asleep in the house, and he took the call, and the caller said, "If you value your life, you will get out of Alabama as soon as possible." Martin Luther King went to his kitchen and made some coffee and sat down at his kitchen table and began to think, wow, how can I get out of this gracefully in a face-saving manner? People will not think I just gave up in order to save my life. And he, in that moment, prayed, and the Lord told him not to fear and to simply continue doing what he was doing. Martin Luther King continued in the civil rights campaign for another 11 years. It was, according to my mother's recount, the civil rights is before my time. But my mom shared that when Martin Luther King started out in his mission, he had the support of people. People were very sympathetic to the cause of civil rights, and he was well received. It was only later in his mission, when his message was merged with the topic of anti-war, that he seemed to encounter opposition. In my reckoning, I can see that, yeah, we would be, as a people, sympathetic to anyone's fight and campaign for liberties and civil rights. But we can see that the anti-war message probably was very much akin to being anti-state. And in fact, we do know that Martin Luther King was under surveillance by the FBI and CIA for being a potential threat. On the Saturday call, the topic of marginalized voters came up, and the idea that we do not like to promote or share the ongoing idea that our votes don't count, and we shouldn't trust the system because we don't want to suppress people or discourage people from voting. But nonetheless, I think we feel tamped down by these last number of election cycles, and somehow our votes haven't added up the way we thought they might. But again, we don't want people to think your vote doesn't count. And then the topic of gerrymandering came up. And there's a case in Virginia where that is going to the courts to be seen if gerrymandering took place there. And we have seen cases of gerrymandering prescribed, in favor of Democrats or Republicans to create a certain outcome. But in our discussion, we had the realization that gerrymandering doesn't mean just carving out a district to assure a win for a particular party. That the real sinister part of it is that in addition to mapping out enough people to create a win for a particular party, it also includes enough of the minority vote, the vote of the other party, to marginalize those people so that their vote will never count within that district. And I think that's worth noting and continuing to include in our messaging, that is truly the issue at hand with gerrymandering. Not that it favors one particular party over another, but that it marginalizes us, the voters. Because in a sense, when our vote is never going to matter in our district because the system has been set up to make sure that it's always canceled out by the majority of the other party, in a broad sense, we can see in those instances, for all practical purposes, even if we voted, we didn't vote. Some of this has led to just a number of us pursuing the idea of General Assembly. The topic and theme of the General Assemblies is basically the idea that we can see that our republic has been subverted and we need to hold elected officials accountable. None of us want to be tamped down, and none of us want to be snowflakes. None of us want to melt away or shirk off our responsibility or not do our part. The Lord has called us to keep on keeping on, and that's exactly what we intend to do. If you would like to join us at Conservative Coffee Hour is every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Central Time on Zoom. We will be having our General Assembly meeting very, very soon. There might be a slight disruption in our regular programming or moderation of the call. If that's the case, please bear with us. I will be happy to send you an invitation to the Saturday call, and I look forward to seeing you very, very soon.